Hello, I'm E.B. Arnold, and welcome to the 6-week course, The Women of Advent. In this study, we'll examine 6 of the women we find in Scripture, leading up to and anticipating the birth of Jesus the Messiah. While certainly these women factor into the people of God as a whole that awaited messianic peace, each one of these women's stories feature their own personal advents, stories of waiting for life, wholeness, and fulfillment. My hope is that both the Advent season we celebrate and the seasons of waiting these women experience help us better understand how to wait upon the Lord. The word Advent comes from Latin advenire and means to wait. In the liturgical or church calendar, Advent is an entire season that begins 4 Sundays before Christmas Day and goes all the way up to Christmas Eve. As its name tells us, it's a season of anticipation, of waiting for something, or in this case, someone, to arrive. The time of waiting, while requiring patience, does not imply passivity. The same Latin word that gives us Advent gives us adventure. While Advent certainly is a time of restraint and expectation, it's also definitely not without excitement and activity. Interestingly enough, Advent actually begins the church calendar. In other words, Advent, the anticipation of Jesus' arrival, not the arrival itself, is the ecclesial New Year's Day. So when we think about it, the entire Christian tradition begins not in fulfillment, but in faith and expectation. And each year, the church all over the world participates in the story of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection by first waiting for all of it to begin. For each lesson after this introduction, we'll begin the session by lighting each week of Advent's candle in the wreath. Hope, peace, joy, love, and finally, we'll light the Christ candle. Through the candles and the content of this course, we'll walk alongside and stand in solidarity with those of the past who long to see the time fulfilled when God would redeem his people. So what do we mean by the women of Advent? Well, because this is a 6-week and not a 6-month course, we can't very well cover every biblical woman who yearned for a Messiah before Jesus was born. So we'll look at the 2 stories in the New Testament that are set before Jesus' birth. We find one in the Gospel of Matthew and one in Luke. Now, these narratives are not parts of one story for us to just mash together. Each story is its own unique entity. Matthew writes his Advent and birth narrative to serve his larger gospel story, and Luke does so for his as well. But having 2 different stories in the New Testament that anticipate Jesus' birth give us a range of themes and perspectives to understand how, what, and who came before Jesus' life and ministry is intimately connected with Jesus' life and ministry. Let's recap the 2 Advent narratives. We might consider Luke's gospel to tell us a story called Advent in the Light. Joy is a dominant theme in this telling. Babies are conceived and everyone rejoices. Everyone sings songs of praise. Mary, the mother of Jesus, Zachariah, the father of John the Baptist, angels, people in the temple. In this story, women are featured prominently. Mary, Elizabeth, and Anna, a prophet in the temple, are all described as prophetically announcing the Messiah's imminent arrival, even as they await it. On the other hand, we might describe Matthew's Advent story as one of the dark. Suspicion is a prominent theme in this story. Joseph is suspicious of Mary, Herod is suspicious of Jesus, and the Magi are suspicious of Herod. Only the star that stops over Bethlehem offers some light on this otherwise foreboding tale. Matthew's Advent is also more centered on men than on women. Mary doesn't even have a speaking role. Now, although Matthew's story proper focuses more on men than women, Matthew does something very interesting in his genealogy of Jesus. He places 5 women in it who played pivotal roles in continuing the lineage that led up to Jesus himself. But they're not the women you might think. Sarah, Abraham's wife, is absent, as is Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, the matriarchs of Genesis. Let's look and see who Matthew does mention. He writes, Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Aram, and Aram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam. And finally, Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, called the Messiah. Now, we skipped a few gentlemen there in the middle, so go back and read that passage yourself later if you want to see a lot of challenging names to pronounce. But we did read the verses that featured all the women Matthew includes: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, here only described as Uriah's wife, and of course, Mary. What is it about these women that makes them iconic enough, not only to include them in the genealogical Hall of Fame, but seemingly to the exclusion of the more expected, and certainly more accepted leading ladies? Now, many scholars point out that these women have lurid pasts. I mean, except for Mary, and even she was under suspicion at first. After all, Rahab was a prostitute, and Bathsheba had a baby that wasn't her husband's. So some scholars who've examined this passage conclude that these women are here to demonstrate how God can use even sinners to work out the divine plan. But honestly, don't all the men in the family tree serve that purpose? And while plenty of the men in the lineage are explicitly described as sinful, David, I'm looking at you. When we look closely at the text of these stories, none of these women are described at all as sinful. Other, seemingly more generous scholars claim that the women demonstrate how God uses outsiders to accomplish the divine plan, as all of these women are foreigners, not born into Hebrew families. Once again, such interpretation serves to depict these women as a perceived liability. To be sure, they come in handy, but that's considered a supernatural surprise. They're used by God in spite of who and what they are. But what if these women have a different purpose, or purposes for being included in this lineage? What if they aren't included in spite of their identities, but because of them? What if our reaction to their participation in the family of Jesus wasn't a gasp of surprise, but merely, of course? As we begin our journey through the text of Advent, it's our job to find out what these women accomplished here in Matthew 1, how they are forebearers of the Messiah, and how they might teach us to wait actively for the redemption promised. In our next lesson, we'll look at the first two women in the context of their own Old Testament stories: Tamar in Genesis and Rahab in Joshua.